Hello, welcome back to the Intern's Oddities, episode 41. Today we're going to be talking about the Unkillables, radiation, tardigrades, and the human adaptation mythos. So, the other day when we were talking about radiation poisoning in particular, I kept thinking of all these different examples of how creatures have been able to adapt to radiation poisoning over time. And not just animals, but humans as well. So I wanted to go ahead and make an entire episode digging really, really, really deep into that. So I got my research notes right here. So let's go ahead and get into it. So, what if I told you that the most dangerous thing you've ever encountered might already be inside you? And it's radiation. The invisible destroyer. It has no smell, no sound, and no taste. It doesn't kill you right away. It waits. It copies your cells wrong over and over until the errors catch up and entropy wins. It's kind of like that C word. Gonna try not to mention that though. But it's very similar and it can cause that as well. But there are beings in our worlds that have stared straight into this death field and laughed. Tardigrades, ancient human tribes, such as those on Marshall Island, we're going to talk about those in a minute, survivors of atomic betrayal, even microscopic life that thrives where the rest of us rot. They got microscopic life in Antarctica. It would not surprise me if they had the plague in Antarctica and they unleash some of that when the ice starts to melt. I don't know. Just a weird feeling I got, okay? Just something crazy I've been thinking. Anyways, this isn't just a science episode. This is about resistance, okay? Defiance. The idea that evolution may be listening and that adaptation can fight back. So we're going to start off with the tardigrades, okay? I like to call them immortals in dust. They were discovered in 1773 by German zoologist Johann August Ephraim Goyes, nicknamed water bears because of their slow, lumbering movement. Tardigrades have been found in volcanoes, deep sea trenches, Himalayan ice, rainforests, and even in moss on sidewalks. Yeah, just walking down the sidewalk. Ooh, there's some moss. I wonder if there's a tardigrade in that moss patch over there. Might want to start checking the moss when you're walking around, but you wouldn't be able to see them anyways. I'm pretty sure they're like microscopic, so whatever. You know. But these tardigrades, they pretty much have superpowers. Like, they make cockroaches look like little family show. You know what I mean, though. They make tardigrades look like wimps. The tardigrades make roaches look like wimps. Everyone talks about how great cockroaches are and how they're so strong and, they're so durable. They ain't got nothing on tardigrades. Check this out. Tardigrades are able to survive temperatures from negative 328 degrees Fahrenheit to over 300 degrees Fahrenheit. They can survive 6,000 times atmospheric pressure and over 1,000 times the radiation that humans are able to survive. And they're also immune to vacuum and cosmic radiation. And they're immune to high concentrations of chemicals like hydrogen peroxide and ethanol. They survive for over 10 years without food or water by entering a state known as cryptobiosis. In 2007, they did a mission called ESA Photon M3. In this mission, scientists exposed two species of tardigrades known as Richtersius coronifer and Milnesium tardigradum to open space. Okay, like outer space. Not just like the air, but like outer space, okay? And my understanding, if I understand this, my research correctly, if I understand this correctly, it seems like they didn't even put them in like a capsule or anything. They just like let them float out in space. And then later on, after they were done with the experiment, they sent astronauts to go collect them. But my understanding is they weren't even like in a capsule or anything. They were just floating out there in space, just without a care in the world. And they were exposed to UV-C, ionizing radiation, vacuum, like the vacuum of space, and unfiltered solar radiation. And they were fine. After rehydration, they had a 68% survival rate after being rehydrated. And not only did they live, but some successfully reproduced. Like, imagine reproducing in the worst environment you could possibly imagine, and then multiply that by 1,000, and they were still able to reproduce. Like, they are absolutely mind-blowing and amazing. Mechanism of survival. Cryptobiosis, as I mentioned earlier, is a tune-like state where metabolism drops below 0.01%. So basically, their metabolism shuts down entirely, and they no longer have any need or requirement to digest or process food, or even eat in the first place, for that matter. Because if they're not processing the food that's already stored within their body, then they have no need to ingest more food, if that makes sense. Now, the next mechanism of their survival is known as trehalose, sugar that replaces water in cells, forming a vitrified or glass-like shell. So you think roaches have a hard outer shell? Uh-uh. They ain't got nothing on the tardigrades, once again. And here is the most important thing of all, because we have a technology now known as CRISPR, which allows scientists to edit genes, okay? Follow with me now, okay? And they have a gene known as DSUP, which is a damage suppressor protein, which protects DNA from breaks caused by radiation. So I have developed this really interesting theory of mine. Hypothetically, if they do enough research on this DSUP damage suppressor protein, and they learn how to activate this gene or this protein within the human genome, which, by the way, they have mapped out 100% of the entire human I forgot how to talk for a second. Hold on. In 2003, they mapped out the entire human genome. And recently, within the last few years, Ancestry DNA was bought out by BlackRock. But that's a whole other topic. I just had to get that out of my mouth because I apparently forgot how to speak for a minute. But my point being that if they study this DNA and this gene within these tardigrade creatures, especially the DSUP damage suppressor protein, which will protect them from radiation, then I think they could eventually learn how to activate this gene within humans, which, as I said, they've mapped out our entire human genome. And if they learn how to activate this gene in humans, then that would mean radiation damage would become irrelevant in my hypothetical theory. But the interesting thing is this is actually something that we could test. But the problem is to test something like this and to, get into a field where one could work with something like CRISPR technology using quantum computers, it takes a very long time, and you will need 2 if not 3 different PhDs to properly understand all this stuff, because on the one hand, you're going to need computer science to work with the computers, but they're quantum computers, so you're also going to need to know theoretical physics to understand how to use the quantum computers in addition to the computer science knowledge. They go hand in hand. And then finally, you're going to need a PhD in biology, so that you can understand the intricate biology patterns of both the human genome as well as the gene structure of each creature and their genes that you would like to experiment with, and eventually, study and progress towards a point where we might be able to use certain genes from different creatures in order to help humans further advance their biology or anatomy. But of course, this is all highly theoretical stuff. But at the same time, it is stuff that I would like to work towards one day finding a way to experiment with and, ethically and morally, ground and stable science. But there, as I said, there's a lot of stuff that I have to learn before I can do all that. But that is one of my future goals. So if nature already made an organism that can ignore the void of space, then what's stopping us from using its blueprint is essentially what I'm saying. Okay? Why can't we use the blueprint of this creature in order to improve our own lives and our own biology and anatomy? Now, moving on to radiation zones of human habitation. The first one is Ramsar, Iran. Background radiation levels up to 260 millisieverts per year, which is 10 times what nuclear plant workers get. The source is radium-rich hot springs and travertine stone used in local housing. So the source is both hot springs and stone used in the local housing. Yeah, like they're just taking irradiated stone and using it to build houses. Like, seriously, guys? Studies. 2001, locals show no elevated cancer risk. In 2005, possible upregulation of repair enzymes like DNA polymerase beta. Now, this is where it gets really interesting. So, what that means is their DNA over time, through the exposure to these vast levels of radiation over time, their DNA was just like, you know what, dog? I think I'm good now. I'll be fine. And their DNA just rewired itself and restructured itself and adapted naturally. They didn't even have to use CRISPR technology. It just adapted naturally. Like, what are the chances of that? Like, that's crazy. And it reminds me a lot of the mental aspect of psychological conditioning, but in a physical form. And I truly believe that's possible because I did it with my lactose intolerance, okay? Not even getting into that. And in 2011, they did a study that showed increased apoptosis, which is damaged cells self-destruct faster, which means that the faster they self-destruct, the faster new healthy cells can start generating. And in Guapari, Brazil, I apologize if I mispronounced that. I tried. Black monazite sand with thorium emits gamma radiation. Readings on the beach are 175 millisieverts per year. Locals believe the radiation has health benefits. Tourist attraction for radiation-based therapy. No known increase in leukemia, thyroid cancer, or congenital defects in studies. So they're basically the children of Adam from the Fallout video games. Now our third area is Kerala, India. Monazite-rich coastal sands of the Kerala coast with 70,000 plus residents who live in 5 by 10 normal background radiation. Like, what I mean is their area where they live at normally has 5 to 10 times the normal background radiation of an average healthy area that's not irradiated. And extensive genetic studies show no increase in mutation rate. That is impressive, very impressive. Enhanced DNA repair gene expression, such as XRCC1, ATM, and P53. Those are particular genes within our genome DNA structure. we're getting we're getting really technical here tonight. So, but try to remember some of this if you can. It'll be very important one day. This is going to be very interesting stuff one day, I promise you. If you don't find it interesting now, then I think you will one day. Now, the last thing that their extensive genetic studies show is greater expression of antioxidant enzymes like superoxide dismutase, or SOD, which my understanding is that will help them breathe better and make them less susceptible to like airborne diseases and illnesses. But to be completely honest with you, I am just trying to use my context clues and completely making a guess with that. That is above my pay grade, so to speak. So if you know better than I do, please do not hesitate to correct me. I am simply making an educated guess. And even if I were to look this up, I still honestly don't think I would understand it. So that's why I'm not looking it up. But if you want to look it up and come back and, explain it to us or explain it to me, then I would actually greatly appreciate that, because sometimes there's some stuff that I'm actually very interested in, but I just simply don't understand it. Like, not to get too far off track, but there's a book that I'm trying to read right now, and I'm a little disappointed with my own personal level of knowledge because I want to read it, but it honestly goes a little bit above my head right now. And I think I'm just going to have to put it back on the shelf and wait until I gain some more knowledge. It's a heavy book. But anyways, moving on. So our fourth location tonight is Yangjiang, China. Yangjiang, China. Southern China region with natural radioactivity 3 to 5 times the global average. Long-term health monitoring shows a lower cancer incidence than the national average. So you're telling me that they have more radioactivity and a lower incidence of cancer. That literally defies all logic right there. And the workers were exposed to up to 20 times the normal levels and showed adaptive resistance known as hormesis effect or hormesis effect. And Marshall Islands, the one that I briefly mentioned on the show the other day, this was a nuclear test site fallout, especially Rongelap Atoll. Residents forcibly evacuated and later returned. Longitudinal studies suggest cells and descendants show greater DNA repair fidelity, epigenetic markers shifted toward radiation resistance, and aberrant immune response patterns suggest long-term physiological reprogramming. So their immune system literally was just like, you know what, guys, this isn't safe. Let's go ahead and just reprogram your entire physiology, okay? Let's do that. They're like, how? How, Sway? How your cells just gonna do that? Are we watching human evolution under pressure? Or are these populations carrying an ancient genetic code already wired for survival in an unstable world? ancient alien theory. Okay? Anunnaki theory. That level of thinking, okay? If the Anunnaki created humans to be their workforce, then it's highly likely that they messed with the DNA of earlier human species, and that would explain many things like the very quick advancement in human evolution, as well as that quote unquote missing link that we're not sure about could be explained through DNA manipulation. But that's getting a bit too fringe for what we're going for, so we're just going to continue past that and continue on to the Radium Girls. Now, this is actually one of my favorite topics. I find this one to be incredibly interesting, if in a very morbid way. And as I mentioned the other day, there are actually some very let's say detailed images about this that would likely give you nightmares if you're squeamish. So I'm not going to show them on here, as I said the other day. But if you're interested, they do have very graphic and detailed pictures. And like, I don't even want to describe them. They're so brutal. Like, I'm worried people would get upset if I described them. They're that brutal. So I'm gonna try not to get too overly graphic, but I am still gonna try to make sure I give enough details to explain what happened as well. So, in the early 1900s, US radium corporations would hire women to paint watch dials with radium based luminous paint. You remember those old watches that would like glow in the dark? These are the women that made those watches. And this is the story of why they actually would actually glow in the dark like that. They were instructed to point the brushes using their lips. So what they would do is they would touch the brush to their lip, and then they would dip it in the radium, and then they would paint, and then they would touch it to their lip after painting with the radium, and then they would dip it in the radium again, paint, touch it to their lip again with radium still on it the whole time, and that's why they got so, so sick from everything. And here's the really sad part is, of course, their bosses told them that radium was safe, even health promoting. They said it would help them look more beautiful, essentially. Now, here's your trigger warning if you need to get out of here for a second. This is where it starts to get a little more graphic. So I'll give you a minute. Do, 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 do. All right, that's enough. So the symptoms were tooth loss, spontaneous jaw fractures, necrosis of the mandible or radium jaw, which is when their lower jaw, like from here all the way back and all the way back, just poof, disintegrated and fell off. And bone marrow failure. Yeah, the very marrow in their bones would like it's just it's a lot. Their ulcers that wouldn't heal, spinal collapse, entire jawbones breaking loose, like I said a minute ago. And there was a 1928 court case known as Leone versus U.S. Radium. This court case set the precedents for workers' rights, contributed to the creation of OSHA, and the public perception of radiation shifted permanently. Now, time glowed in the dark, but only because these women were willing to die to make it beautiful. Who today is dying to make your convenience look harmless? Are farmers dying because they can't feed their families because we make too many groceries at big factories? You know, what these are things that we often take for granted, but sometimes maybe we should, stop for a minute and think and appreciate all the simple things that we can get in life and why it's so easy and simple for us, but maybe not for other people. Now, let's move on to cryptobiosis in human medicine. Cryptobiosis is biological suspension where life enters near total dormancy. So it's kind of like hibernation almost, but on steroids. It's like an extreme form of hibernation. And this is seen in tardigrades, nematodes, which one revived after 46,000 years in permafrost. So we have a nematode that is 46,000 years old. Let that sink in for a minute. We literally have a creature that lived to be 46,000 years old and did not die. 46,000 years old. Never give up on your hopes and dreams, guys, gals, everybody. Never give up on what you want in life because there was a nematode that lived for 46,000 years. If a nematode can do it, so can you. Now, it is also seen in yeast spores, rotifiers, and brine shrimp, also known as sea monkeys. Now, here's where we get into the really, really juicy stuff. Yeah. This is where they might take our video down. But we're gonna try this. So the human implications. DARPA funded research into metabolic suppression for trauma patients. Cryobiosis versus cryonics. Cryobiosis is the biological pause and non-damaging. That's what the cryptobiotes do, like the tardigrades. Okay. Now, cryonics is freezing after death and is less viable. There can possibly arise complications with that, as you could imagine. NASA studies on trehalose and synthetic DSUP in human stem cells. Remember a minute ago when I said we should study the tardigrades and possibly putting them into human cells? Well, here we go. We did. We did study that. And it turned out that it reduces radiation-induced apoptosis by 40% in vitro. 40% reduction in radiation-induced apoptosis. That's pretty impressive. And it also enhances recovery from ionizing radiation by upregulating the HIF-1A gene. Now, there are future possibilities where these could be used to make battlefield stasis chambers, long-duration space missions with suspended crews, and disaster shelters with cryptobiotic biohibernation modules. Now, this is where we have to ask ourselves, is death a failure of biology or simply an outdated user agreement like the one with Ubisoft recently did, but we're not trying to get into all that. That's just not right. Now, in closing, We call them the Unkillables, but really, they're the ones who adapted when no one thought it was possible. Remember how I'm always saying that I believe I have this theory where I sometimes wonder if the people that we call insane or crazy and lock up in asylums, maybe we don't understand them because they have gone to the next stage of evolution and we just haven't caught up yet. Maybe not all of them. Now, I'm not saying all of them universally, but just maybe a few of them here and there, every once in a while, just maybe they're actually smarter than all the rest of us, and we don't understand them, so we call them crazy and lock them away from everyone else because we haven't evolved as far as they have. From the tiny bear that walks through solar flares to the island child born in Fallout, there is a message here. Survival may not be about strength. It may be about silence, about stillness, and about entering the void and learning to echo. Radiation doesn't hate you, but it doesn't care either way. And yet somehow, some of us are starting to adapt to it. Or maybe we already did. Now, thank you for coming to hang out today. This has been a lot of fun. This is a really interesting topic. So I did, a little bit longer than I have been for the last little while. But I'm glad you got to hang out with me. I'm glad we got to talk about this. And I will see you next time. Thank you again. And as always,